we can probably kick things off. So welcome everyone. Just a bit of housekeeping at first. We are going to record the webinar and we will share it out afterwards. So look for an email from our team today with a link to the recording. We also have team members paying attention to questions online. So if you have or questions in the chat, so if you have questions, we'll be either answering those in real time to the best of our abilities, or we'll save them and have Alan address those during the presentation. If we don't get to any of your questions, we promise we'll follow up afterwards and make sure we answer those. So today today's webinar features Alan from Tailscale. He's presented before. We're really excited, and we're also really excited to have Max, who's a senior solution architect from AWS, to add his insight and expertise to the conversation. So I'll kick it over to you, Alan. Thanks. Take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Tim. Well, welcome everyone. I appreciate you taking time out of your work day or evening, wherever you're at, and we've got folks from all over the world joining us today. So excited to be able to talk a little bit more about Tailscale along with Max over here from AWS. So what we're talking about today, right? Tailscale plus AWS, enterprise cloud networking simplified. We're going to discuss a little bit of, for those that might be brand new to Tailscale, I know there's a quick poll in there, who's using it, etc. But if you're new to Tailscale, we'll highlight some of that. And then we'll jump into a quick little demo and just kind of show how Tailscale as well as AWS works together today. In fact, I do have a poll. I'm going to go ahead and launch it here. We'll give everyone a minute or so. It is about if you're using Tailscale for AWS workloads today, for those that might be familiar with it. So if you take a few seconds there, we'll get some answers in there and share the results and kind of go from there. And while the poll's up, so the agenda, we're going to talk a little bit about challenges of remote access and traditional VPNs, traditional tools that people are using to manage access to everything. Then we're going to talk a little bit about how better to secure your AWS workloads. AWS is awesome. They're everywhere. They're huge. But if you haven't planned accordingly, you could actually have a security, be a little more detrimental to your security footprint. So we're going to discuss that a little bit. Then we're going to talk a little bit AWS and Tailscale, how we're better together, why both products work seamlessly to secure some of these workloads, and then as well as a demo. So looking at the poll here, we've got looks like everyone's mostly answered there, and wow, we were actually pretty split. We got about 66% of you are not using Tailscale to secure your AWS workloads. About 35% are using it. So that's pretty cool. So that's exciting to know that we've got a good mix of some folks using Tailscale, some folks are not. I'll go ahead and share those results out. That way you can all see where you lined up and everything. So I appreciate that. All righty. So this is fantastic. So let's talk about, for those that might not have secured workloads yet with AWS, we're going to talk a little bit what is Tailscale, just a high level discussion on that. And then we'll dig into some of the meat of it. So what Tailscale is, it is a zero trust layer 3 network overlay. Built upon WireGuard. For those that might be familiar, WireGuard is a fantastic, very mature open source remote access VPN type of technology, and Tailscale builds on top of that. It's a great path, and we've taken it, we've enhanced it, adding that connectivity, control, and end-to-end security for any resource on any infrastructure. In today's infrastructure, we're going to talk about AWS. And so, that brings us into challenges of remote access. What are some of those challenges that might occur when you're dealing with remote access within AWS? Conversation I had with a customer recently, parent company, they have a lot of multi offices all over the world. Every office is using a different tool. Maybe they're using OpenVPN, which is another great tool out there. They're using traditional IPsec. They're using maybe an old legacy VPN or remote tool that came with a firewall. And there's a hardware concentrator. And so it's just what people maybe use it. And then I'm talking to a lot of folks where they're not using anything at all. They're just, hey, I've got port 22 exposed on the internet. I'm just SSHing right into it. Or even worse, remote desktop, right? 3389 right across the internet and just RDP into a workload or, SQL Server database. Or last month, if you were last month's webinar, Lee talked about Kubernetes, where a lot of Kubernetes APIs, that control plane is just publicly exposed on the internet. And so, people use a variety of these tools out there or none at all. And so we look at remote access, some of the challenges, you look at performance. Hey, is my tool, is it designed for high performance or just connectivity? A lot of times it's really designed for connectivity. Hey, I'm connected and it works, but the experience is, a lot can be left to be desired on that. And it might be using some of that legacy technology as well. Then you have a tool that's maybe not specifically designed for AWS or for the cloud in general. A lot of legacy connectivity tools, they're not originally designed for our distributed cloud environment where people are all over the world, people are working from home, or they're transitioning from a co-working place to a coffee shop to a restaurant back to the office. And when you have some of these legacy tools where we have to have whitelisted IP addresses or manual configurations, some of them are just not designed for that access. And then topology, and we'll dig into a little bit of topology, what that looks like. There's two thinkings around that traditional hub and spoke, as well as a more modern mesh style of topology that's out there. And then, of course, those possibly might have some hardware management. We talk to a lot of customers on a daily basis that have, they have legacy hardware concentrators stuck in a data center or an on-prem office. And so now someone's remote and now they have to connect to now you've got hardware you're involved with. And with companies going to hybrid work models or all remote work models or getting rid of on-premise data centers or using, hybrid tools there, some of this hardware issues that they might have may or may not be the best tool potentially for modern cloud native work along that line. So let's talk a little bit about continue that challenge. We'll go back and talk about the hub and spoke piece here. For those of you that have set up VPNs or set up remote access for your environments, for your customers' environments, or your employees' environments, your team's environments, this might be really familiar. That traditional hardware concentrator, or gateway, could even be software, where everyone's connecting to this gateway. Then from there, the gateway is connecting to your end resources. And, that's just how things have been done. You have a single point of failure in some ways, unless you have high availability set up for something along this line. But, works great if you're all sitting in an office. Maybe everyone's geographically located in one spot, trying to access something somewhere else. But then going back to this hybrid model where we are all over the place, and this hub and spoke starts showing its legs of remote access and performance and connectivity. And this link here is actually, this diagram is from our blog of how Tailscale works. We kind of dig a lot more detail. If you want to read a really well done technical article on this, you can follow that link there. And then, we look at, so why did Tailscale come about? Why did we build it? Well, built on WireGuard, where you have this mesh network, this more modern, we hear mesh a lot. In fact, a lot of homes are running mesh Wi-Fi today, where you can have multiple access points in a house. You just roam throughout your house or your office, and you don't worry about saying, oh, I need to now connect to a different access point or whatever. It's all mesh, it's all one, and everything just seamlessly transfers across. Well, with the same idea that goes along with WireGuard and that mesh topology, it's like, hey, Alan's over here in this one section. I need to connect to a resource in AWS US East. Well, why should I have to go through my corporate concentrator that's in San Francisco and just to get to my server that's in US East, which is in Virginia or Ohio? Why can't I just go directly to that? Well, with WireGuard and Tailscale, you can actually do that, and your performance increases, your latency is going to go down just because you're not traversing your data all the way across the United States or, or across the world to get to something. So, this piece here, let me see here. Yeah, Max, and I've got Max here from AWS, and one of the things that he sees a lot in his side of the world is talking to customers is some of the challenges here. And Max, I want to throw this over to your side and kind of get your thoughts on some of these points here.
Yeah, sure. Hi, Alan. Hi, everyone. I'm Max. I'm a senior solution architect working for AWS. I've been working in AWS for the past 5 years. And today I'm going to be talking to you about a few things that we and I see with customers try to do their VPN configurations and such. And that's the reason why Tailscale is such a good solution. And that's why we're here. So basically, there are 3 main issues that I particularly see when AWS customers try to use a VPN solution and try to secure their access towards their environment. The first and potentially the most important one, but it's not, and you will see why, it's latency or performance issues. Right now, everyone might have a latency and performance issue, and that could be caused either by routing, network setup, encryption, and how hard that encryption is to using that VPN, the traditional VPN that you're using. But also could be internet connection, device configurations, and even the VPN protocol. One of the things that Alan was telling you about, that OpenVPN or IPsec, it's one protocol, and then you have another protocol completely different, which is WireGuard, that Tailscale uses. And on top of this, AWS have their own VPN solutions, as you probably know, which both of them are using OpenVPN, also IPsec, and they're not bad solutions, but they're solutions that apply to some use cases, and for other use cases, you need something different. VPN solutions that AWS offer right now are site-to-site VPN and client VPN, and both are great, but they have limitations. One of the limitations is that they're routing towards a single region, or that you might require additional configuration like a transit gateway or a VPC peering to get to another region. And then another thing that I particularly see with AWS customers is the complexity between file sharing, which it seemed to be something really simple. I've been seeing file sharing since I started working on this subject, which is computers, 15 years ago, and still sharing issues is sharing files is complex mostly between peers. Why? Well, basically the same reason that Ali was saying recently. You're located in one place, and the data center is located in a different place, and your coworker is located in a third place. And instead of doing a direct connection between the 2 peers, you're using potentially the hub and spoke model. So you're going towards a region and then back to your peer for that sharing. And on top of that, but completely related, it's the lack of security or configuration. When you're sharing files, you're mostly relying on the operative system and the authentication of that customer, of that user or customer or coworker. But you're not having security at the networking level, other than just yes, I'm authenticated, so I can use the VPN, and that's it. That's how I get there. And those are really interesting topics that Tailscale add a layer on that. And the other thing that I think it's really interesting on this is the configuration side of business. Configuration, it's complex. It requires different steps. If you think about it, I was naming Transit Gateway. I don't know how many of you have used Transit Gateway in the past, but Transit Gateway, it's complex if you don't have a team. I particularly work with startups. Startups don't have the time to waste in complex configurations and then manual prone errors because you need to modify those route tables, and it gets too long, and they have to focus on their product. They have to focus on how they're going to go to business, how they're going to sell their stuff, if there is a market to their product, and all of this steps that you need to secure the access, it goes against the speed of business that they need. And this applies to everyone. It's not just startups. It's just in the startups, it's easier to look and easier to see. But in any company, if you add layers of configuration, it's going to get tougher and tougher to get there, to get to the proper security that you need. And right now, security is everything, because security affects your reputation. Most of the people think, okay, security, it's fine. I mean, I can take it. It's something that I'm not going to invest that much. It affects your reputation. And the reputation that you have is the hardest thing to rebuild. And that's what we are seeing in the last couple of years with all of these attacks coming every single day, and how it is to get back on the place that you used to be. One of the interesting things that we were seeing in the next slide that Daniel was showing is why users should think on, start from the very, very beginning on securing everything, the whole platform that they're using, and why not doing this as an afterthought, as after. As I build first my product, then I check my MVP, everything is working, let's do security now. Usually that leads to three major problems. First is that you're allowing a lot of potential attack surface. So if you think about it as an afterthought, as the thing that I'm going to do next, what is security? You're allowing a potential attack to happen. So security should be the first thing, and you should apply security from the very, very beginning to reduce all of those risks that you're potentially being affected by, and that it's going to lead towards more customer confidence. And that's very important, because think about it, it's related one to the other. If you're secure, your customers trusting you, and if they're trusting you, they're going to increase their business to you. So this is how you have to think. It's not just a technical issue. It's not just the fact that you're secure. It's how the security of business affects your overall at the end of the day. And that's a thing that we did, or at least particularly me, I'm a technical guy. I usually don't think that much on the business side of things, and that's interesting. And the last thing I want to talk about is how, using a new modern way, a new modern solution, something that's fairly newer than the previous ones, improves our lives, the development teams, the operation teams, the DevSecOps teams. How, in this particular case, I love how Tailscale works with GitHub Actions. And I think, I know, Aline, if you're going to show that, I'm sorry, I'll cut you right off. But I think that's one of the best things that you have. How it not only improves, it not only secures the platform, which is really important, but also improves our lives. If we need to develop, if we need to, create this as infrastructure as code, and how that all of that things are connected to create this, this type of platform that Tailscale is, and the type of access that you give to your customers. That's my two topics. I don't know if you have any questions.
That's awesome. No, Max, I appreciate it. And it's great hearing your insight, especially as you're talking to customers that are coming onto AWS with these workloads. And you bring a great point in when you got startups or organizations that don't have a strong team, or they're coming from a on-prem strong, and they have to approach that cloud security model a little bit differently. And if they don't, especially that first piece there, right? Zero trust security from the beginning. If they're not thinking about that, then that's going to provide a lot of headache potentially down the road for sure.
Definitely.
So I'm going to take a moment here. Thank you, Max. That's awesome. I'm going to look at a few questions here. Lee's been busy answering a lot of them, but let me take a moment. Actually, I'm going to throw up a poll here as we continue on. I'm actually going to launch this poll. It's about your workloads on AWS. What are you concerned about securing today? So there's a new poll out there, and I don't have all the AWS tools and services, but just some of the major ones that we tend to see a lot from our customers. So definitely throw some votes in there as we kind of dig into some of these questions here within chat. And we've got someone here who's a startup founder, Justin, made life easier managing IoT gateways. So that's a compliment. Thank you much. That's awesome. Oh, DNS with VPC, how that works there, how we can make Tailscale play nice with AWS DNS within our VPC. Currently having troubles connecting to other RDS EC2 instances in our VPC IP address, not static. And I'm going to show a little bit of a demo later on with some RDS, and maybe that will help, you know, kind of think through how you're accessing some of these resources, and maybe that will be helpful here as well. And let's see what here. Stacy, is Tailscale using WireGuard certified for CJIS data? I do not have an answer. I don't know, Lee, if you know that one off the top. I've heard of CJIS a little bit here and there, but I'm not 100% sure on that. But we'll figure that out for you as well.
I'm currently working on trying to figure that out, so I believe we
Okay.
do, but I don't want to give a non-authoritative answer.
Awesome, thank you. So there you go. And yes, we've seen a lot of questions about NAT gateway and private subnet, and yes, we Lee's actually been spearheading a project. We're working actually with AWS to make this I'll say make this issue, to make this a better experience. So we've got customers, you know, they don't want to put on a public subnet, even if you're not exposing a port or something along that line, but we are working with them to improve this. So definitely stay tuned. If you're a Tailscale customer and you're dealing with that, let us know. Send a private message to Lee or Tim or whatever, and then we'll get you guys kind of fed into what we're trying to do and what we're working with. All right, this poll's been up for about 2 minutes. I'm going to go ahead and shut it down. And let's go look at this. I'm going to share these results. Majority of workloads that people are concerned about today is EC2, 71%, containers right there, 2%, databases right there. Wow, tied, 71%, 69%, 69% RDS, and then serverless, not as much, and then other, you know, which is a myriad of who knows what. But that kind of matches in line with, I think, what we see. Customers that are using the cloud, using AWS, large container usage, whether it's EKS or Fargate or ECS, or even standalone Docker containers. A lot of EC2 still out there. There's a lot of workloads using EC2s, and then databases, right? The ability to scale databases and, you know, having all your data, your information out there, but being concerned about, you know, securing that aspect as well. So that's great answers there. So thank you everyone for that one. And so question, and we'll jump right in here in a minute. Question from David about Molvad VPN, Molvad exit nodes for obfuscation could solve a lot of my use cases. Can this be set up on the AWS side? The Molvad integration with Tailscale is within Tailscale itself. So you can go under user panel, and there's an option to select Molvad. It's an add-on that, you know, you can add. You can have use ACL, so only certain users can use it, or you can even actually give it to a whole group of engineers that might be able to use it. It's not really anything that's set up on the AWS side of the fence, but here's a use case that recently we had a customer that was trying to solve this. They had content, they do advertising related content or video content in different countries around the world. And so what they're trying to do in AWS as their primary cloud is they were spinning up maybe an EC2 instance in Japan, and then manually having to go there or open up ports, or it was a long, cumbersome process. Well, they actually got Molvad and integrated it. And so now users, engineers can test from New York City, select Japan, Tokyo or Kyoto, wherever the endpoints are, and immediately access this content that they might have hosted on AWS in Japan or something. And, you know, seamlessly from a security QA standpoint, they're not having to manage a bunch of extra workloads and figure out manual configurations. They can use that Molvad integration that kind of goes right through there. So, all right, so let's continue on. Keep the questions coming. If you have in chat, keep Lee busy typing for sure. If you got anything specific for Max as well, let us know as well. So let's continue on. You know, this theme of secure remote access, and then we'll jump into the meat of things where, you know, a little more exciting, the actual, let's show what Tailscale looks like accessing RDS instances. So part of that, remote access, right? Reducing the complexity, as has been mentioned a few times, automating access compliance, and then minimizing that attack surface, as Max even mentioned there, where you're not having to expose extra ports or extra IPs, things. GitOps, I don't have actually a GitOps demo for today, Max, but you're right. The GitOps piece there is a great way to automate the ability to use infrastructure as code and push out changes, and then using, GitHub, Bitbucket, GitLab, and other tools to automate some of that work requests or some of the changes to your tailnet. That way you're not having, hey, let me, bring a donut over and tell my friend, hey, can you just give me permissions to this? You have this whole workflow that has an audit trail with pull request and merge reviews, and tie it into a ticketing system, gives you that ability to handle some of that. And so AWS and Tailscale, why we say it's better together. What makes this better together from our side of the fence? Simplification, right? We understand, and I used to be a sysadmin for many years, that the cloud's complex. And if you're coming from a traditional environment, or you're multi-cloud, or even AWS multi-region and multiple organization units and accounts, man, it's complex. VPCs and security groups. And so we want to alleviate some of that by saying, if you have Tailscale, you can manage a lot of that connectivity and remote access and simplify some of this. And zero trust, right from the beginning, where the trust is based on the user's identity, based on a trusted source, Okta, Entra, AD, Google Workspace, a GitHub. And that makes it easier because now we have an identity, and we can tie these identities to the end user experience and what they're accessing. On top of that, we're AWS Marketplace. So we are AWS partners, for those that might be curious about that. We are in the marketplace, and we are part of the ISV Accelerate and a few other things there. So we're trying to even make that easier for folks that use AWS heavily, might have an EDP spend or something along that line, that you can say, hey, let's add Tailscale into our portfolio. And of course, resources, what we can secure with. And I think that survey answered, EC2, Kubernetes, which we have an awesome Kubernetes webinar that Lee did last month, that the link is out there, showcasing how you can secure your Kubernetes resources with Tailscale, RDS databases, and obviously a few other pieces as well. All right, so we'll continue on here. Again, simplifying remote access, connectivity, increasing that security for your AWS access, and then compliance at scale. So we'll move on here. And then Marketplace, as I mentioned, there's a little snapshot of what it looks like. You can see us out there again. Ping us. And one thing I didn't mention here, and this says here, backed by support, right? We got a phenomenal support team that can help, and customers, as well as really, really solid documentation out there. So the deployment models, what would it look like on AWS if you were going to deploy Tailscale today? For those in that early poll, like 50% of our attendees may or may not have Tailscale resources. Well, device to device, as you mentioned, you put Tailscale on your laptop, your phone, your server. You throw it on an AWS EC2 server, or maybe running it in our Kubernetes operator. The other model is a subnet router, which we're going to showcase in today's demo, where you can advertise access to CIDR ranges within AWS. So RDS, for example, AWS doesn't allow you to throw up Tailscale on an RDS host, but you also do not want to expose that to the general internet. So by using the subnet router model, gives you the ability to manage access into that. The app connector, which is, think of it as a subnet router or an exit node for fully qualified domain names. A great use of the ability to whitelist and lock down access to SaaS applications that might be out there. So instead of having all of the employees send in your home IP address and hope it doesn't change, you can use the app connector to manage all of that through Tailscale itself. And then again, a subnet router, the exit node model, where you want to manage access, whether it's using Mulvad or your own EC2 instance that you spin up all over the world to manage general internet access using Tailscale. For those in compliance or maybe in a coffee shop and you're not trusting coffee shop Wi-Fi, you can leverage that with AWS resources across the board. All right. So before I hop in here in the demo, I'm going to throw up one more poll here for everybody. And is your AWS footprint growing, shrinking, or staying the same? You know, you read the news out there, what's happening. Some of it's growing, some are, people are bringing it or diversifying. So we'll throw that out there a little bit. Let me check some questions if we got some. Lee, you've done an awesome job. Thank you for answering a ton of questions here that folks have asked. Jude, Alex from Tailscale will make a video on YouTube about GitHub Actions sometime in the future. That's a great thing. We'll throw that suggestion out to him. Multiple exit nodes. Yes, you can have multiple exit nodes if you're running that in your own organization. That you can have. Some companies and teams will do that. They'll have a couple exit nodes in the US, maybe some in EMEA and Asia, and as users traverse those locations, they can choose and those different exit nodes for sure. All right, so let's segue in here to the demo piece here, and I'm going to walk through a couple things. We're going to show subnet router access and some SSH, kind of show what it looks like with Tailscale and using that identity piece there to manage access. So over here, I've got my US console in my sandbox environment. I've got one EC2 instance up and running. What's on this instance? Just to show everyone, when I look at from a security piece here, I have my security group and I have no inbound public connectivity. Within the security group, I'm allowing access for RDS, but no SSH, no RDP, no ability for this device to be accessed outside of using a tool that AWS provides, SSM, or in our case, Tailscale. I also have some RDS databases. Excuse me. I got two of them here. I got my production instance where we're running our production application here. And then I have a developer engineering instance. Again, these instances sit out here and I have my endpoints, but I don't want to make these publicly available for folks to access. So how would I access this today using something like Tailscale? What does that look like? And that's what we're going to jump into on this piece here. We're going to use the subnet router model here where we have an EC2 instance that is advertising my routes. In this case, it's a 172.20.0//16. And this is where my RDS databases are in my VPC. I'm also using this for an app connector as well. So it's got some external IP address routes for Mongo Atlas. But in this case, we're more concerned about this piece there. And so what I'm doing with this subnet router model, when we look at AWS reference architecture, I've got my RDS database and I've got Tailscale subnet router that's broadcasting that access into that RDS database. So from an end user perspective, it's just a matter of accessing it. Let me see here. Oh, if I can type here. So in this case, I got my developer instance. Actually, let's check my rules and permissions first before I jump into this. So I've got two groups here. I have my production RDS group. I have my developer. Let me zoom in here real quick. There you go. And my developer RDS group. So I've got two groups here. I'm the same user in it for demo purposes. I've got my tags because I tagged my resources. And then here's the important part. Here's your ACLs. And everything we do within Tailscale is based on ACLs. And by default, everything is deny. So you have to explicitly grant information or grant access to resorts. Oh, let me pause this poll for a minute. All right, let me share this real quick. So everyone's growing. So I'll share those results. So it looks like that it's growing. AWS, we're using more resources. Some are shrinking, not as much. Some are staying the same, staying stable, but definitely a lot of good growth going on out there with AWS. So thank you all for participating in some of these polls that we've had today. All right, let's go back to this. So in this case, I'll walk through what my rules look like. I have a group, production group, that has access to anything that's tagged on port 22, so I can SSH into this, as well as 8000. I'm running maybe a simple web service, and then a session recorder. So we're going to show what SSH recording looks like, and then my VPC, not my subnet endpoints. In this case, this user, anyone in this group, can access anything within my 172.20.0.0 network on 5432. So if I have multiple RDS databases out there, in this case Postgres, as well as anything from an SSH perspective. Whereas, what if a member is part of the developer team? Well, I'm a junior dev, just came in, probably don't want to give that person access to SSH, or maybe everything within an environment. So I'm going to actually lock this down. You notice I have a more specific IP address. This is the development instance of my RDS name, and we can even verify this, because if I just do a, if I try to ping it, it's going to resolve. You're not going to get a result back just because, you know, we don't have ping there. But there's the IP address of my RDS instance. So from a development access, I only have the ability to access this database or this service. So let's go and make this user part of, we're going to comment out the developer person here. I'm a production engineer, so I'm going to access everything in production. So in this case, I can log in. Here's a developer instance there. I'm going to put in my SQL password, and then I can see all my database. So I have just accessed a Postgres RDS database through Tailscale. I'm in South Carolina. This is in Virginia, wherever this is hosted at, US East, or wherever that is. Leveraging my rules and permissions that I have within Tailscale to access this database. So I can run my queries, I can do the work that I need to do. So if I need to, hey, I'm going to select, if I can type, and I can run all my queries and do all the work that I need to do as an engineer, which is super awesome, right? And I can even SSH into this device. So I can leverage Tailscale to SSH into these, because if we remember, when I look back at my rule set, I have the ability to access any database within this subnet. I can also SSH into it as well. And then who am I? I can look at Tailscale version, and I can see a lot of this information on the system itself. Because that was, I believe, let me just clear this out here. Oh. That was the demo dev instance. So what if I need to access my non-dev instance? I want to access the production instance, and I'm, you know, this engineer. So let me copy this host name here. We're going to do this basically the same thing here, except we're going to access our production instance, because I'm in the production group. So therefore, I should have the ability to access all of this as well. So let's go ahead and do that. Same thing, put in my password, and there it is. I'm logged in, good to go. So what if things change? Well, let's swap things out here, and we're going to comment out this. So I'm no longer in the production database. I'm now a development engineer on the dev group. Should I have access to this production or not? Let's find out. Still going to ask for the password connection, but what's going to happen here is after a minute or two, this is actually going to time out. Why is that? Well, looking at my rule set, I've only defined what part of that RDS CIDR range I can have access to. In this case, it's only the development instance. I do not have access to the production database. And so you can leverage, you know, again, user's identity. And this doesn't have to be a user. This could be group. So if you tie into a tool like Okta or Entra AD and you have skim provisioning, you can actually use groups and manage access into these resources using these groups. So in this case, that's going to time out, but maybe let's go back to the dev instance here. And let's see here. That it should let me connect because I am a developer, or at least a supposed developer. There's my dev instance, same thing. We're going to log in and there we go. Once again, I'm able to access the services because I'm part of the developer group, which has access specifically to this resource in itself. So, hopefully that just shows, hey, we're using, a subnet router. Going back to my RDS, these are my RDS instances I connected to, but I'm routing that traffic through my EC2 instance here, this one right here, as a subnet router to, 172.20.20.92, but it's leveraging that in that subnet router model. And then I'm using ACLs to say, what can this user do while they're in, with their group that they're a part of, etc. So a little bit if there. Question here, is there a roadmap to using combination of tags and ACL to define access? And I don't know if there was another question that had come up with that one from earlier. You should have I think with tags, you can have multiple tags and define access. I'm not sure, David, what. Yeah. And Lee has a little elaborate a little bit more on that one, and we'll do our best to get that answered there. All right, so let's continue on. Let's see, which group was I a part of? In this case, I'm part of the development RDS. So what does that mean? Well, can this user SSH? Well, technically, if I'm looking at this, I should not be able to SSH into anything because, again, my user doesn't have the right roles, the right permissions to access this information within AWS. So, that just shows, again, a little bit of what you can do with Tailscale, with AWS, how you can manage access into it. Let's switch back here. And one neat thing, and this, doesn't matter whether it's an AWS resource, whether or not it's, on-prem, one of the neat things you can do with Tailscale is the ability to record these sessions. So in this case, we're going to SSH back into my subnet router. I'm in because I changed my group. I have access to it. But you notice you have this little prompt here that said, hey, this session's being recorded, because we give the ability, and this, when you look at teams from a compliance standpoint, from a security standpoint, incident response, the ability to have recorded sessions within SSH. And that, what does that give you? So in this case, I can do my work, but let's exit out of here. What does that look like? Well, in this case, it gives you an ASCII cinema ability to play back something that just happened within your instance. You get your user, so we know that, hey, it was Alan. He connected from this source, which is my laptop on my telnet, and then destination. So when you look at it as a team saying, hey, because looking at that one poll, right? A lot of you all are still using SSH or EC2 instances, maybe not SSH, but if you are, and you're having to log in to do some work, do some maintenance, this gives you the ability to have session recordings in order to manage access to it. And one cool thing coming down the roadmap as well is we're also looking at implementing something like this for Kubernetes access. And the Kubernetes or containers was huge. Sometimes organizations need to say, hey, we need to know if someone exec'd into a pod and ran a command. And we're actually, one of our roadmap features is to add something along this line here as well. So I want to pause a minute. Hopefully that was, clear a little bit of what Tailscale can do from a, access to your AWS resources. In this case, whether it's directly to that, using a subnet router, locking down that, right? Tying in an identity that a user has, using the groups and the tags, those are just kind of scratching the surface, a little bit of access to and manage to your AWS resources. And as we finish up here, let's look at a few questions here. For Jeremy, in SSH session recording, are we able to get a textual output of the session so that we can index it into an APM system? For example, do advanced analytics on it. So yeah, so what I didn't mention is these sessions are recorded in ASCII Cinema format. So they're .cast files. And I believe because they're .cast files, you can grep them, you can pull information down, drop it into something along that line. For sure. On our site, we have full documentation of even how to, play it back or whatever to ingest into that for sure. Let me see here. Any other questions? As we're wrapping it up here. Yes, Brandon, thank you. Yes, Lee is definitely killing it with those Q&As. He's been awesome. Lee's fantastic. Let's see here. Yep, in there. Anything else here? Okay, looks like Lee's, man, he's done my job, made it easy for Max and I here on this side of the fence. So as we kind of wrap up here, we got a few minutes left, but just a couple links here. App connectors, we didn't really talk about. Subnet routers, high availability, how you can leverage Tailscale in high availability regional routing, which is a phenomenal way of leveraging your AWS resources or access to your resources when you got users all over the world. Kubernetes operator, the GitOps, as mentioned, Terraform provider, and then some of my favorites, we got an AWS reference architecture, and as this page right here that I was referencing, as well as production best practices. Throw it out there. You will find, if you've never used Tailscale, how really dead simple it is. But with that, also know we have some best practices, especially if you're on AWS, like not using burstable CPUs and certain size requirements. That'll just help you as you architect, as you plan and test things out for sure. And then a few more other links there. If you haven't played it, go to tailscale.com and click the login button on the top right. You can get going. If you have any questions, or if you're a customer, if you want to ask a little bit more, Lee and I, we're on the solutions engineering side of the fence, but we're more than happy to introduce you to one of our account execs for sure. Our change log, always new features as well coming out there. You can follow us. Someone mentioned Alex in the comments here. Alex is on our developer relations team, does amazing videos about Tailscale and really cool use cases. He's got a whole one on SSH. So check that out. Check us out on Twitter or X, as well as Reddit. A lot of activity out there as well. And as we wrap up here, let me look at a few last minute questions here. Seneca, WireGuard is not FedRAMP compliant due to weak encryption algorithms. Is there any way around that? Maybe using AWS FIPS endpoints. Are there any plan to become compliant? It's a great question. We get that a lot. There's constant discussions. There's a lot of moving pieces underneath the hood, and for things to happen, I believe in the WireGuard space that we use heavily, as well as some others. Just keep asking. We'll continue to ask, but right now, today, no, but maybe in the future for sure.
Yeah, I just want to add something.
Yeah, go ahead, Lee.
If you don't mind, I just want to add something to that. It's not necessarily the case that the WireGuard encryption algorithms are quote unquote weak. It's that they haven't currently been audited by the JAB. And so the WireGuard encryption algorithms are actually incredibly strong. The real problem is that a lot of the FedRAMP requirements actually expect or require outdated encryption algorithms. So as I already mentioned in the Q&A, if this is a high priority for you, please contact us and let us know, and we can have discussions around what that looks like from the WireGuard implementation perspective. But it's definitely not down to weakness of the encryption.
Yeah, thank you. Yep. Todd, if we have multiple subnet routers in a VPC, how do clients choose which to connect to? Lowest cost routing, take anything like a load and subnet router, take count. In essence, how it works when you have high level, and we have a blog article, some documents. If you have subnet routers that are set up for a regional router, high availability, it's going to take the distance from the user to the nearest DERP relay server. So I'm in South Carolina, so I routinely go between New York City and Miami, or sometimes Texas, for like a DERP relay server. And so if you have a subnet router that's maybe in Virginia, it's going to look at saying, oh, Allen's closest to Miami, so it's going to use that subnet router to route my traffic. It will never route me through Europe because my latency to any of our European derp servers is well over 100 milliseconds. So that's going to be the way it works along that line. Let me see here as we finish up here. Need to make HTTPS requests from an AWS deployed service to an on-prem deployed Frigate software DVR service. Is Tailscale HTTPS enabling a good solution? I'm currently using dynamic DNS and Let's Encrypt to run a reverse proxy with Nginx. So we use Let's Encrypt as well. If you're looking at the Tailscale HTTPS for like Tailscale funnel, I don't know if that's what you're kind of asking about that piece there. Tailscale funnel allows you to expose Tailscale services to the general public internet under an HTTPS Let's Encrypt banner as well. Those are not necessarily designed for high performance and production. Tailscale funnel is more geared for, hey, I'm a developer and I want to show Lee this cool new web application I built, and I can expose it off my laptop and he can go to it with a fully qualified, Telnet domain name with a Let's Encrypt certificate. Internally, if you enable HTTPS, it's still using Let's Encrypt along that line. So if you need mutual TLS for internal services or routing, like the SSH session recorder uses MTLS along that line. So you can definitely use it for that, for sure. Another question, can we publish Tailscale annotated service using Traffic Hub Ingress publishes ingress via TLS as reverse proxy? I'll let Lee answer that. He is our Kubernetes guru for sure on that piece there. Great questions, everyone. I appreciate for those that have stuck around here to the end. Hopefully this was helpful for sure and educational. Learned a little bit. Thank you, Max, for hopping in here from the AWS side and giving some of your input of how you see things. Thank you, Lee, as well for answering questions for sure, and Tim for organizing this. But last question here as we wrap up. This is awesome, by the way. No, this is great. Follow up. I had two subnet routers in the same VPC, say US East 1. Most of my users are in New York City. Would it load balance between the two? There is a load balancing. I'm trying to think here right off the top. They're in the same VPC. It will look and say, hey, which one has, the lowest latency, and kind of load balance along that line with it. For the most part, subnet routers kind of on the HA side are more of a, hey, this one went offline, so we're going to traffic. But with some of the load balancing, it should be able to route that and work a little bit better with that for you, Todd.